Merry Christmas. Merry, Merry Christmas. Oh, what a Merry Christmas day.
Merry Christmas, all my wonderful Yuletide fans from the BC Andrews Critiquer. There have been a long line of Christmas classics over the years. It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street, Home Alone. The list just goes on and on. The pinnacle of them all, of course, is hands down Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. I know you all know the story like the back of your hands by now, but I'd look lazy if I didn't summarize it, so here you go.
It's the story of Ebenezer Scrooge, an old moneylender in 1840s London that virtually everyone hates, and with good reason. He's a first-class asshole who literally only loves money and treats everyone he encounters with disinterest at best and like reindeer crap at worst, especially his below-minimum wage clerk Bob Cratchit. What's more, he hates Christmas even more than the Grinch would 114 years later. Christmas dinner as nephews? No. Donation to Christmas charity? Hell no. A paid day off for Bob Cratchit? Yeah, he actually does do that as literally the only kind thing we see him do until the end of the story. But then again, I'm sure labor laws played a part in it. Anyway, that Christmas Eve, his dinner alone in his bedroom is interrupted by the ghost of his equally cruel business partner, Jacob Marley. Marley says that he's suffering for eternity in hell on account of his corrupt and selfish ways, and even has to carry the chains he made from the greed in his own lifetime. But Marley wants to save his best friend from similar damnation and says he'll be visited by 3 spirits to show him the error of his ways. And sure enough, 3 ghosts, each representing Christmas from a different era, visit him that night and show him what he's lost from his greed, what he's losing now, and what he's destined to lose in future. Can Scrooge learn his lesson in time? Besides being the most famous Christmas story ever written, it's also said to be the most adapted novel of all time. So as you can imagine, it was kind of hard to choose which adaptations to compare, but I eventually settled on the 1984 George Scott version and the 2009 Jim Carrey one. So let's go on a journey through time to see if I can teach you which adaptation I think is more effective. This is Old vs. New, A Christmas Carol.
Okay, so first quickly note, there won't be a best story round because, well, the stories are just so damn similar, and it would mainly just be rehashing comparisons from the other rounds. So Tiny Tim is going to be the final round of this Old versus New. Anyway, let's get into our anti-hero, the character who inspired the second most famous Dr. Seuss character ever, and whose name became an adjective for Christmas haters everywhere. If you haven't heard of him yet, then bah humbug. This is Best Ebenezer Scrooge.
'Cause he thinks it gives him power. If he became a flavor, you can bet he would be sour.
In the very rare case you haven't heard of Scrooge's character, I think the best way to describe him is if you mix the Grinch with Mr. Krabs at his absolute worst. He finds Christmas to be the equivalent of COVID-19 and values money like the air he breathes at the expense of everyone around him. Yeah, he's a pretty crappy guy. But he did have kind of a tragic backstory where he had an estranged father that wanted nothing to do with him, even though he did eventually apologize and welcome him back from boarding school. Oh, but his fiancée dumped him cold, even though it was because his money lusting was just starting and it was clearly going to be a loveless marriage. I can't defend this guy as much as I thought. Anyway, I hate to start off like this, but this one wasn't even close. Look, I love Jim Carrey, and I can tell he did his best, but the thing is, Jim Carrey is just naturally comedic, so even when he's trying to be this cold and ruthless miser, it still ends up coming off as funny, even when it's not necessarily over the top.
I wish to be left alone. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer.
Even that voice, it sounds more like Carrey doing an impression of Albert Finney's Scrooge for SNL. It's not necessarily Carrey's fault, and he did do pretty well at the grieving scenes. I mean, he felt more sincere there than with the asshole scenes. I just don't think he was the right casting choice is all. George C. Scott, on the other hand, is my favorite portrayal of Scrooge ever, even more so than Alastair Sims. He was cold, intimidating, and besides being uncaring towards the poor and miserable, he almost seems like he enjoys every second of their suffering.
Those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die.
If they would rather die, perhaps they had better do so and decrease the surplus population.
You could easily see this SOB being hated by an entire town. This version also implies that he has more dishonest business practices, like how he promises to sell corn to a food bank at a reasonable price, but then is like, no, I said it would be this price yesterday when we first met, now it's this BS one. Take it now or it'll go up even higher tomorrow. Not to mention his character development seems to take a bit longer here than in most versions. We often see him trying to defend his selfish past choices or making bitter comments to the spirits, not really showing much progress until visiting the horrible Christmas future. Though that may be because his tragic backstory is a bit more, well, tragic in this version. We find that Scrooge's father has his son brought home from boarding school not because he actually missed him, but because he wanted a free method of getting rid of him, hence why he's being sent off to Fezziweeks in 3 days to be an apprentice. I will give Carrie Scrooge credit on the fact that he actually steals in this version, from his dead partner's corpse no less, and I thought not going to see him on his deathbed till he counted all his money in the Alastair Sim version was heartless. And again, I don't think Carrie Scrooge is bad per se. The corniness that comes from his attempt to portray this heartless cold monster does make him fun to watch, kind of like with Albert Finney's Scrooge. I just feel that George C. Scott's Scrooge is much more naturally cruel and money-lusting, and noticeably more so than other versions. Carrie, I enjoyed your Scrooge, and you still did awesome as the other ultimate Christmas hater, but you don't beat Scott by a long shot.
Point goes to the old.
Ah, humbug.
But wherever there's a penny-pinching money luster, there's usually a devoted, good-natured employee who has a great attitude despite working for a miserable cheapskate. And in this case, he's called Bob. No, not that Bob. This is Best Bob Cratchit.
'Cause he thinks it gives him power. If he became a flavor, you can bet he would be sour.
Scrooge's clerk Bob Cratchit is played by David Warner and Gary Oldman respectively. Despite the below minimum wage pay and constant abuse he receives from his boss, he's probably the only person who actually kind of genuinely likes Scrooge aside from Fred. He's always respectful to him and even proposes a toast to him at his family's Christmas feast for providing them the money for it, even if it was chump change. And even centuries later, he continues to show us that you don't need money to be happy as long as you have a loving family. Even if you do need it to save your terminally ill kids, but that's beside the point. But I digress. Which one is better on the whole? Well, as much as I love both actors, it's kind of the same scenario as with Scrooge, but reversed. David Warner is known for playing some of the biggest scumbags in media, from Lovejoy in Titanic, the Master Control in Tron, obscure Batman villain Ra's al Ghul, sorry if I mispronounced that, and even a character freaking called Evil in the Terry Gilliam film Time Bandits. So, as you may have guessed, seeing him play this meek but all-around loving husband, father, and optimist is kind of odd, especially when this character is often portrayed by some of the most lovable characters in all of media. And like with Jim Carrey, I can't tell that Warner is doing his best. I just don't really feel the natural warmth and affection from him that the character needs.
It seems to me that Tim is getting stronger every day, that his limbs are growing, that he's in better spirits, it seems to me.
Tim, I'm to have the whole day off tomorrow. We'll be together, the whole family, for the entire day.
Warner's trying, I can tell, but he's just not naturally sweet and gentle like Bob Cratchit should be. I can't say Gary Oldman is my favorite Cratchit ever, but he is really damn effective. His Cratchit has kind of this lovable dork vibe to him that really works for the character.
It's so lovely to see you, Mama.
He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in church because he was a cripple, and it might make pleasant for them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see.
And yes, that is kind of odd because Gary Oldman typically plays more serious characters in media, but I guess Oldman is just more of a versatile actor than Warner and thus can adapt more effectively, kind of like with Gene Wilder in The Producers. Hell, just look at that design, it's just so charmingly adorkable, not to mention one of the lesser Uncanny Valley designs. Again, that's not saying much, but still. There's not a whole lot about the writing that's different, but of course that scene in Christmas Future where he's unknowingly staring into the eyes of the invisible Scrooge and letting out all his grief over Tiny Tim's death is very clever and effective. especially when it looks like he really is seeing Scrooge and saying, "Screw you for not paying me enough to save my kid, you old turd." God really knows how to steer bad people towards redemption, doesn't he? I don't recall Warner's Cratchit crying even once over Tiny Tim's death, and I do kind of like how the ending reveals that he was the narrator all along. Again, I love David Warner, but like with Carrie, I just don't feel he was the right casting choice, and while Oldman's Cratchit isn't my favorite one, that would probably be either Mickey or Kermit's, that lovable dork nature he has still makes the portrayal really damn good, as does that powerful scene in Christmas Future. Doug Walker's right, that really is the best version of that scene in any adaptation.
Point goes to the new.
I'm sorry, sir. I am behind my time.
Now let's get into more of a Halloween mode as we look at the 3 supernatural entities who inspired Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life. When there's a cheap-ass miser in your neighborhood, who you gonna call? Best Ghost Trio!
'Cause he thinks it gives him power. If he became a flavor, you can bet he would be sour.
First, quickly note that I'm not counting Jacob Marley in this round. He's in the supporting cast one. But moving on, one thing I love about these 3 spirits is their personalities seem to reflect the era of Christmas they represent. Since Scrooge's Christmas Past had its fair share of pros and cons, the Ghost of Christmas Past has a very neutral and monotone presence to them. Since Christmas Present is frickin' awesome, the Ghost of Christmas Present has a very jolly Santa Claus-like personality, even if he can be stern towards Scrooge. And of course, since Christmas Future is Hell on Earth, the Ghost of Christmas Future is the Grim Reaper in all but name. That was really clever personality establishing on Dickens' part. So which group of ghosts is better? Well, this one is kind of interesting. Typically in fiction, ghosts are portrayed as trolls who like to annoy the hell out of people. No pun intended. And the Zemeckis film really showcases that. Not that they weren't something of trolls already, but Zemeckis really pushes it, where the 3 spirits could give the lonesome ghosts a run for their money. And needless to say, the film's Uncanny Valley really helps with that. But these spirits do have a more important purpose in this story than just to troll Scrooge, as awesome as that is to watch. Their purpose is to be mentors who guide Scrooge and teach him the error of his ways. And all this extra trolling somewhat takes time away from their teachings towards him. Like compare the scene that follows after the flashback to Belle leaving Scrooge. In the '84 film, Scrooge is like, "Well, I almost went after her."
Almost carries no weight, especially in matters of the heart.
Then he's basically like, "Well, at least I was able to focus on earning the extra wealth I have now." And the spirit replies, "Okay, that's what you gained, now let me show you what you've lost." And we see Belle married with loving children, and happier than any amount of money has ever made him. In the Zemeckis film, the spirit immediately just starts changing into the faces of each individual we've encountered in the past, crossing into Uncanny Valley territory that creeps out Scrooge and the audience. He tries to can the spirit literally, but gets shot into the air like a cannon. While the scene is effective, it doesn't even come close to telling Scrooge that almost stopping Belle means nothing, and he missed out on a much happier life. Or how about when the Ghost of Christmas Present uses Scrooge's own words against him when he learns that Tiny Tim will die without the proper medical treatment?
If he is to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Yes, it was really clever to actually have him take on Scrooge's face and voice when mocking him. Really shows him how horrible he personally sounds, but the '84 film has a follow-up to this scene that I find far more powerful.
You use my own words against me.
So perhaps in the future you will hold your tongue until you have discovered what the surplus population is and where it is. It may well be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child.
Even without any special effects, this scene is more effective in my opinion for 2 big reasons. One, when you make a spirit as jolly as the Ghost of Christmas Present pizzed, you know you've screwed up at levels of pizzing off Wonka. Second, as brutal as he is, he's actually providing very good advice. You shouldn't say something so horrible about someone else without knowing everything about them. As Jesus said, the last shall be first and the first shall be last in heaven, so he probably would have been seen as less deserving of life than poor suffering souls like Tiny Tim. Kind of tough love from the spirit, huh? I can't really favor the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come in either movie since, well, he's mute, and each version does a fine job at teaching Scrooge through their gesturing. And don't get me wrong, the ghosts in the Carrie version did still have words of wisdom for Scrooge like they should, but not quite as much in favor of scaring the living hell out of him. The 84 ghost may not have been as ghost-like due to budget and time period constraints, but I do feel the mentor component of them was better utilized here, and since I feel that component is far more important to the story, Old takes the win on this round.
Point goes to the Old.
I see a vacant seat.
But of course, you can't set a bad guy straight without showing them the multiple lives that they wrecked. So let's see which cast impacted Scrooge's redemption more with Best Supporting Cast.
'Cause he thinks it gives him power. If he became a flavor, you can bet he would be sour.
Of course, who could forget the multitude of other characters in this classic? From Scrooge's spontaneous nephew Fred, who really wants to earn his uncle's approval, his dead partner Jacob Marley, who sets up the ghost visits to save his best friend from damnation, the other Cratchit family members who try to follow Bob's example and enjoy their poor lifestyle, Scrooge's ex-fiancée Belle, who dumped him due to his money obsession, Scrooge's benevolent boss Fezziwig, his loving sister Fan, the housekeeper, the alms collectors, and that's just to name a few. So which one is better? Well, this one is going to be a bit shorter. See, unlike with the other categories, the supporting casts have barely anything to separate them, neither in writing nor performances. I guess the filmmakers didn't feel as much of a need to give their own special take on these characters like they did with Scrooge, Cratchit, or the Spirits. Don't get me wrong, there are a few differences, but I honestly couldn't decide which one was better on the whole. Like, the 84 film has a lot more time devoted to Belle, where we see more of her first meeting and dating Scrooge before she dumps him, and like said before, we see how she found a happy life through family instead of money, an important scene towards Scrooge's development. By the way, this next part is kind of filler, but I do still want to talk about it. Most other versions kind of twist the breakup scene to make Scrooge seem more like the bad guy in this scenario. And to this day, I can't decide which one is worse. The Alastair Sim version?
You know I'm right then.
I'm as proud of your conviction that you are.
May you be happy in the life you have chosen.
Thank you. I shall be.
Or Scrooge McDuck's version?
For years I've had this honeymoon cottage, Ebenezer. I've been waiting for you to keep your promise to marry me. Now I must know. Have you made your decision?
I have. Your last payment on the cottage was an hour late. I'm foreclosing the mortgage.
Scrooge is mostly portrayed as pretty bummed in both movies, which is keeping true to the book, but you do feel a bit more sorry for him than we probably should. Again, not really relevant, I just had to make filler. And like said before, Scrooge's pop actually appears in this version, something not often seen in Christmas Carol adaptations, and that major psych he pulls on his son when we thought he'd really changed really helps make Scrooge's backstory more effectively tragic. The Zemeckis film, on the other hand, actually shows us Jacob Marley when he first dies, and no, it's not nearly as developed as in the Alastair Sim version, where we actually see a montage of the relationship he and Scrooge had as slimy best buds over the years, but it really gives us all the more reason to despise Scrooge when he actually steals the coins rested on the corpse of his best friend's eyes. Talk about despicable. Another advantage the new has is, while ignorance and want are indeed very creepy in both movies, the ones in the Zemeckis film actually behave like the respective adjectives they're named after. The ones in the original and most other versions just give blank stares. In the 84 film, we see Cratchit's family's excited reactions to receiving the huge turkey Scrooge anonymously gave them for their Christmas feast, but in the Zemeckis one, they seem a lot more devastated about Tiny Tim's death, just like Bob in this version. That's really all I could find to distinguish them. On the whole, each supporting cast is written and performed identical to one another. Sure, there are a few characters that each version does a bit better, but not enough in either one to make a clear decision. So I think I'm gonna have to call a tie on this one.
Point goes to both, meaning this round is a tie.
You outdone yourself.
We shall sleep tonight with light hearts.
our big final round. Let me show you how even the tiniest of characters can leave the biggest of impacts. This is Tiny Tim for the win. Really?
'Cause he thinks it gives him power. If he became a flavor, you can bet he would be sour.
Yes, little Tiny Tim is almost as iconic as Scrooge himself. While not universally beloved like Dickens probably intended, it's hard to deny that he's a pretty strong role model for people whose lives suck. Even though he's crippled and dangerously sick with no hope of survival due to the family's insufficient funds to get him treatment, his attitude is pretty much, screw it, at least when people see me in church, they can remember how Jesus helped many other folks in my condition. And he probably has the most hope and spirit of the entire Cratchit family besides his father, maybe even a bit more than him at times. I mean, his folks are devastated about his condition, but he never bats an eye. What you think of the kid is up to you, but I personally find him very endearing. And hey, if you make Scrooge feel for you, that's really something to be proud of. Anyway, I hate to start off so one-sided again, but like with Scrooge, this one was no contest. The original Tiny Tim is vastly superior. Why? Well, first off, let me just say that I don't think this is the creepiest looking Image Movers film on the whole. Oh, it's creepy, sure, but not nearly as much as that hideous abomination Mars Needs Moms that came out 2 years later. That is, except for poor little Tiny Tim, who, well, honestly might be even scarier than Milo. But that aside, he doesn't really look that much like a kid who's just an inch away from death. No, he actually looks pretty healthy and seems to have a lot of energy when he talks.
God bless us. Everyone. The pudding looks delicious.
That, and I felt he looked a bit too old. I think the maximum age for Tiny Tim should be about 8 or 9. This kid looks about 11. The 84 one, played by Anthony Walters, might be the best one out there. For one, he was 6 years old at the time. Perfect age range. But more importantly, they really made this kid look and act like he was terminally ill. Even though he has a great attitude, he always seems very quiet and weak, as he should be given his condition.
And God bless us, everyone. I'm quite sure I will. I feel I'm getting stronger every day.
I definitely felt a lot more pity for this Tim than the Zemeckis one. It helps that the original has a lot more screen time. The Zemeckis one only appears during the Cratchit's feast and at the very end, and I guess I can't fault the film too much, as that's how much he appeared in the book as well. But in the 84 film, we see this kid actually go all the way to Scrooge's office to wait for his pop all by himself. Really shows how persistent and close to his family this little tyke is, and his "that'll be me running and playing one day" pop attitude is just awesome. I know this old versus new has been a bit more one-sided, but that does not mean I dislike the Zemeckis version by any means. The darker and creepier atmosphere really gives it a fresh feel, and honestly, I think that may have been why Zemeckis wanted to use the Uncanny Valley motion capture for this film, to strengthen that creepy atmosphere, and it works. And it really does show understanding of the source material, but it's just not one of the better adaptations of this story. The scary scenes are engaging, but they distract from the more important character building and teaching scenes. And while the heart and emotion it shows is really powerful, and the best of all adaptations at times, there's not quite enough of it, and Jim Carrey as a serious Scrooge was just no. I can't say that George C. Scott adaptation is the best one ever. That would probably be either the Alastair Sim or Muppets version, but it was really close. It does a better job at capturing the heart and morals of the book, and George C. Scott was the best Scrooge ever in my opinion, so in this case it's the better adaptation of Dickens' classic.
Point goes to the old, the superior movie.
Are these the shadows of things that will be, or shadows of things that may be?